Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I don't back down easily. My military father taught me discipline early. At 22, I joined the police force and worked up to leading a SWAT team by 30. My grandfather left me his house in an upscale neighborhood when he died. 6 mansions, 3 on each side of a private road. The neighborhood is mostly peaceful. My younger brother lives with me and we have 2 dogs, a German Shepherd and a Husky that some people think is a wolf. They're trained well and stay on our property unless they're helping someone or playing with the neighborhood kids. My elderly neighbor sometimes invites them over for treats and to run through a little obstacle course. We started noticing trash in our yards. The old couple at the end of the street complained first, then the animal lover next door found litter in her yard too. Soon I was finding fast food wrappers and cups on my property. After the 3rd time, I'd had enough. I staked out the street with friends from my team. We waited near some bushes by the entrance. Around 2 p.m., a car drove by slowly and the passengers threw trash out the windows, burger wrappers, napkins, and a large soda cup. I caught the cup mid-air. It was still half full. When they started to drive away, my friends began throwing the trash back. I threw the soda cup through their open window. The sticky liquid splattered inside their car, and the trash my friends were throwing stuck to it. The car stopped. The driver and 1 passenger were female, the others male. They looked young, but something seemed off about the driver. The driver shouted, demanding to know what we were doing. I said I was fed up with their trash, joking about throwing kids. My friends laughed, which made the driver angry. The driver threatened to sue me for assault, saying they hadn't done anything wrong. I told her I couldn't allow them to throw trash here because children lived in the neighborhood, and I had dogs. She asked if the dogs were mine. When I said yes, she pointed out that my dogs scared one of her passengers. I told her I didn't care and could own whatever dogs I wanted on my property. This made the driver furious. She unbuckled and tried to slap me through the window, yelling about the community. I stepped back and showed my police badge. My friends showed their badges too. I told her I was a SWAT team leader and ordered them to exit the vehicle with hands behind their backs. Their faces showed shock. 2 passengers cooperated, but 1 ran from the car. I told my dogs to chase the runner. They caught up quickly, with 1 dog grabbing his pants leg and dragging him back. My friend asked about their ages. As my dog pulled the runner back, the youngest passenger broke down crying. He said they were all between 14 and 15 years old. The driver tried to silence him, insisting she was 16, and handed me her license as I pulled her from the car. I asked if she really wanted me to read her license. She started to say yes, but I was already looking at it with my friends. We saw it belonged to someone at least 30 years old, renewed that same year. We removed her from the car and handcuffed her. We took all 4 to the police station. 3 months later, we met in court. The judge gave the 2 younger passengers community service and $1,500 fines each. The runner got a $2,000 fine and a 2-3-year prison sentence for resisting arrest. The driver got a $5,000 fine and 7-10 years for resisting arrest, littering, assault, assaulting an officer, and harassment. The harassment charge came after the youngest passenger said the driver and runner had pressured him and the other passenger into littering. The others confirmed this. The runner apologized and said the driver had forced him to help, which the second passenger supported by mentioning he heard them arguing. The judge then moved the harassment charge from the runner to the driver. When the sentences were announced, the driver screamed and begged her father for help. He pinched his nose and shook his head. 2 years later, I found the 3 passengers working at the market near our neighborhood. A gate had been installed at our street entrance in 2019. I asked the runner about his prison time, and he said his sentence had been reduced by a 1.5 years for good behavior. They gave me wine and bread, apologizing again for what happened. The driver is still in prison where my friends and I work. We patrol her cell block, and she knows it. She starts fights with other inmates, all documented as her being the aggressor, which keeps extending her sentence. When I walk past her cell, I pick up any trash on the floor. I'm still cleaning up after her, like in the old days. Working at a small casino gave me a front row seat to drama. A few years back, I was managing one of those limited operations. Where I live, the state allows casinos, but they're nothing like Las Vegas. We could only have 20 machines total. We were basically a small business with gambling licenses. One Tuesday afternoon, a middle-aged guy approached the counter looking stressed. He wore business casual and seemed frantic. He told me he had lost his wallet somewhere in the casino. He said he had been playing at machine number 12 about 20 minutes ago and now couldn't find his wallet. I nodded. Lost items were common, but wallets were concerning. I told him I would help him look, but warned him that lost wallets don't usually have everything when found. We searched around his machine, under tables, and through the lost and found box, but found nothing. I was about to suggest he cancel his credit cards when two young women approached the counter. One wore a bright red top with jeans, while her friend wore a black dress. They looked to be in their mid-20s. The woman in red said they had found a wallet near the bathrooms and wanted to turn it in. Her friend nodded, looking pleased. The guy's face lit up when he saw his wallet. He thanked them. He checked through it, and his expression changed from relief to concern. He said his ID and cards were there, but the $40 cash he had was missing. The women looked offended. The one in red said they found it exactly like that and were just trying to do a good deed. Her friend said they didn't take anything and that the wallet was empty when they found it. The guy looked at me. He asked if there was any way to find out what happened, as he was certain he had cash in there. I thought for a moment. I mentioned that we have security cameras and offered to review the footage. The women looked at each other. The one in red said they were going to get back to playing and were glad they could help. After they walked away, I told the guy to wait while I checked the footage. Our surveillance wasn't great, but it covered all essential areas. I went to the back office and reviewed the tapes from the last hour. What I found was different from their story. The camera showed the women finding the wallet near machine number 15, nowhere near the bathrooms. Then the woman in red opened it, took out what looked like cash, and put it into the machine she was playing. I knew we had caught them. I called the police and explained the situation. Since this wasn't an emergency and it was only $40, they took about 40 minutes to arrive. During that time, I watched the women who were still playing. When the officer arrived, I told him what happened. I pointed out the two women who had stolen money from a wallet and then returned it, saying there was no cash. The officer, a middle-aged man, went to talk to them first. I could see them from across the room, both looking innocent as they spoke with him. After a few minutes, the officer came back to me. The officer said the women seemed believable. He said they claimed they were just being good citizens, returning a lost wallet. I told him I had everything on camera, and they definitely took the money. I asked if he wanted to see the footage. The officer nodded, and I showed him the video in the back office. His expression changed as he watched the evidence. The officer asked if he could show this to the women, and I agreed. He called the woman in red to the office. When the footage showed her opening the wallet and taking the cash, the officer paused it. The officer asked her what we were seeing if she didn't steal the money. She said it was just her cell phone. The officer said it was clearly a trifold wallet. She went quiet. The officer told her to put her hands behind her back and arrested her. She started crying. The officer then talked to her friend who was waiting outside. He asked her again and she stuck to their story about finding the wallet in the bathroom. The officer told her he was arresting her for interfering with an investigation. She also started crying as he handcuffed her. The officer asked the guy if he wanted to press charges, and he said yes. I made a CD copy of the video and gave it to the officer. About 7 months later, the police visited again. A different officer told me they had lost a CD with the footage and needed another copy for the trial. Being a small business, we didn't keep footage for more than 2 months. I had nothing to give them. Without that evidence, all charges against the women were dropped, as it was just the victim's word against theirs. The only good thing was that those women did spend some time in jail before making bail. It wasn't much, but I hope it made them think twice before stealing again. I work at a fast food place while finishing my business management degree. Most nights are routine. Take orders, collect money, hand out food, but sometimes we get what we call special customers. Last Tuesday, I was at the collection window during dinner rush. Cars were lined up around the building. I handed a woman in a white SUV her burger meal with extra fries. I smiled, wished her a nice evening, and turned to collect payment from the next car. That's when I heard it. The woman shouted hello at me repeatedly. I saw her waving her fries at me. I couldn't respond because I was taking payment from another customer. Before I could finish, something hit my chest. A French fry. Another fry came flying through the window. The woman was throwing her food at me. The woman shouted that her fries were too salty. My co-worker asked the woman to pull forward to a parking spot where we could replace her fries. This made the woman angrier. She grabbed handfuls of fries, throwing them through our window while eating some at the same time. The woman said the fries were disgusting with too much salt and wanted a refund. Fries were all over the floor, counter, and even in the shake machine. I stood there watching this grown woman have a tantrum over French fries. My manager heard the noise and came over. He's in his 40s and has worked in fast food for over 20 years. My manager asked what the problem was. The woman shouted about the salty fries and wanted a refund. She threw her burger at him while still eating some fries. Food went everywhere like Cookie Monster eating. My manager wiped ketchup off his shirt and shook his head. He told her he wouldn't give a refund for food she was eating and throwing at staff. Her face turned purple. The woman ranted about spending hundreds of dollars at our restaurant monthly. She threatened to call the police if we didn't give her a refund. My manager smiled. He'd seen this before. He told her to call the police, adding that it wouldn't go how she expected. The woman said she wouldn't leave until police arrived. My manager said that worked for him. She blocked our drive-thru for 20 minutes, screaming and throwing fries. Cars behind her honked and some left. My manager had us take orders inside only, and he called the police himself. 2 officers arrived and approached her car. She gestured wildly and pointed at our window. One officer came inside to talk to us. I explained what happened and my co-worker showed where a hot fry had hit her arm, leaving a red mark. The manager told them the woman was disrupting business and had hit an employee. The officers went back to her car. The conversation looked heated. She kept pointing at the restaurant. One officer opened her car door. The woman refused to leave without a refund. The officer told her to exit the vehicle. The woman refused, claiming we had hit her with salty fries. The officers told her she was trespassed from the property and no longer allowed there. When she still wouldn't leave, they said she was breaking the law. They put her in handcuffs and took her away quickly. She screamed about her rights and suing us. My manager shook his head as they drove away. He said things never go how these people think. We spent 30 minutes cleaning up fries from everywhere. Later, my manager told me they'd banned people before, but this was the first arrest over salty fries. The next day, we learned she was charged with disorderly conduct, trespassing, and assault for throwing hot food at my co-worker. Some people can't handle extra salt. For years, I worked from home for a multinational company. I manage a small offshore office in the UK with 3 other colleagues. Each handles different responsibilities. I'm the senior manager with local administrative support, local engineering, and local marketing on my team. We rarely interact since everything moved online. In the past year, we've had fewer than 10 phone calls and met in person maybe twice. Last month, corporate headquarters announced everyone needed to return to the office at least 3 days a week. One rule for all, they said. It made sense for departments that worked closely together, but not for my team. What bothered me was that the senior manager who pushed this policy had moved to a different country from headquarters and was exempt. When I asked about this exception, the senior manager told me different rules applied because she had moved countries. I agreed to comply but asked that my team receive the same return to office kit as everyone else. Headsets, extra laptop chargers, and lockers for our personal items. The HR representative quickly told me they could provide the headsets and chargers, but no lockers. They said the new downsized office was what we had, and since central London was expensive, we would need to make do. I reminded them about their one rule for all policy, but they dismissed my concerns. Then I found out our US colleagues were all given wireless headsets because the senior manager had purchased one for herself to make traveling between countries easier. I called the equipment department and asked for wireless headsets for my team. The equipment manager said the rule was wired headsets for UK staff. When I mentioned the US team had wireless ones, they said those were especially approved for their department. My patience were thin. As the most senior UK employee overseeing about 60 people, I knew I had leverage. I told the equipment manager I would accept the wired headsets, but needed to request some appropriate peripherals to go along with them. They told me to submit my request, and they would see what they could do. I drafted an email outlining all the necessary peripherals we would need. I waited for formal approval before acting. Here's what I ordered: 60 wired headsets, £30 each, 60 headset cases, £10 each, 60 Apple Lightning to 3.5mm adapters for company iPhones, £8 each, 60 health and safety compliant backpacks, £42 each, 60 spare 3.5mm cables, £2 each. All this instead of simply ordering 60 wireless headsets at £47 each. A week after everything arrived, the finance department called. The finance director noticed a significant expense for headset peripherals and asked me to explain. I told them since we were required to use wired headsets rather than wireless ones like our US colleagues, I needed to ensure everyone had the proper equipment. The finance director said this was more expensive than budgeted. I agreed and pointed out wireless headsets would have cost approximately £2,820 total, but the wired headsets with all peripherals came to about £5,520. I reminded them I got approval for all items before ordering. The finance director said this didn't seem efficient. I agreed and mentioned the newest UK hires were being issued wireless headsets now. I suggested we should return all the wired headsets and get wireless ones instead for consistency and functional purposes. There was a long pause, and then the finance director said they would speak with senior management. The next day, an email announced all UK staff would be transitioned to wireless headsets to ensure technological consistency across all departments. No mention of the extra £2,700 they wasted on my demonstration. I haven't returned the wired headsets and peripherals yet. I'm keeping them as a reminder that sometimes you need to go the extra mile to make a point. If management gives me more trouble about one rule for all policies that don't apply to everyone, I might get creative again. At our last video conference, the senior manager who lives abroad was using her wireless headset while explaining how important in-person collaboration is. The irony wasn't lost on me or my team. I lived in the same neighborhood for over 25 years, raised both my kids in this house, my daughter who's off at college now, and my son who most folks around here call John. John's been challenging, to put it mildly. Since he was about 13, he's been in and out of trouble. Shoplifting, vandalism, fighting, you name it. By 16, every cop in town knew him by sight. I've spent more nights than I care to count picking him up from the police station. I love my son, but those teenage years nearly broke me. When I heard that knock on the door last Tuesday, I had that familiar feeling of dread. Figured it was about John again, even though he'd been keeping his nose clean lately. I opened the door to find an officer I'd seen before but couldn't name. Young guy, probably mid-30s, with that cocky attitude some of them get. The officer asked if this was John Smith's residence, and I confirmed that it was. When he asked if John was home, I told him no. The officer then asked if I was John's legal guardian since he was still a youth, and I said I was. He pulled out a paper from his pocket and thrust it toward me. The officer told me it was a summons for John to appear in court on charges against him, saying the date he needed to be there. I looked at the paper, noticing something wasn't right. I tried to hand it back. I told the officer he had the wrong person and that it wasn't my son who did whatever was alleged. The officer interrupted me, saying that he did have the right person and John needed to appear in court on the date. I tried again, my patience slipping. I repeated that my son didn't do this and that the officer had the wrong guy. The officer's face hardened. I could tell he thought I was just making excuses for my troublemaker kid. But that wasn't it. The officer spoke in a harsh tone, saying he did not have the wrong guy and that John had to show up for court, adding that he would be in trouble if he didn't appear. His tone was what got me. That superior tone, like I was some idiot who didn't understand how the law worked. After years of dealing with my son's issues, being talked down to was the last thing I needed. I asked the officer if this was now my piece of paper and if I could do whatever I wanted with it. The officer said yes, it was. I ripped it into pieces and let them fall to the ground. The officer smirked. The officer said it didn't matter if I ripped up the paper, my son still needed to be in court. That's when I started laughing right in his face. The officer stared at me confused. I asked him what address was on his copy of the paperwork. The officer looked down at the copy he was still holding. I watched his expression change from smug to confused. I told him this wasn't even the address he had on his paper, and that I had been trying to tell him that, but he kept cutting me off. I told him to look at the full name. I explained that the paper said John Rip Smith, but my son's name was John Pletty Smith. I repeated that he had the wrong guy, and told him to take his paper and leave. The officer's face went red. The officer said I had ripped up official paperwork and started to complain. I reminded him that he had said it was my paper. I then told him to take his garbage and get off my property. The officer stood there stammering, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he bent down, gathered the torn pieces, and walked off to his cruiser. 2 days later, I got a call from the precinct apologizing for the mix-up. There was another John Smith 3 blocks over who'd been caught breaking into cars. The sergeant even mentioned they'd had a conversation with the officer about proper procedure when serving summons. My son may have had his issues, but he deserved better than being blamed for something he didn't do just because of his reputation. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.